Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Leadership Lab podcast. My name is Dina Phillips, and I'll be your host. I'm joined again today by Jesse McCullough, pharmacist and leadership expert. Jess, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Dina. I was telling you before we started recording that I'm dealing with the first world problem in that I had to cancel my haircut earlier this week, and you laugh at me if you will, but I typically get my haircut every 3 weeks, and whenever it goes to 3 weeks and 1 day and 2 days and whatever, I start to get a bit antsy. So
I
I'm in
get
that
it.
phase right now. Supposedly if I make it to the weekend, I'm going to be okay, but we'll see how that shakes out.
Right, right. Well, you look good, so
Well,
no
thank
worries
you.
as
I
far
I
as
was
that
actually
goes.
fishing for a compliment on that
Yeah,
because I feel very awkward when my hair gets this long. So
I get it. Yeah, I get it. And so, uh, well, today we are going to be talking about the approachability principle. So, if anyone out there is like me and considers themselves a bit or maybe a lot of an introvert, this is likely an area where we could use some tools to improve
Mhm.
our interactions with our patients and our teams and so on and so forth, our spouses, our neighbors, all those things. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about this principle.
Well, I'll tell you, going back to when we had the pandemic, right? Everybody was at home on lockdown and a lot of that stuff was happening. I made a decision to put a video on Facebook every day, and I wanted to do 100 days in a row. And it actually took me 101 days to do 100 videos. But during that time, I did a number of just communication principles. And one of them was this approachability principle. If you're not familiar with the approachability principle very simply states when you are at ease with yourself or being at ease with yourself helps others be at ease with you, right? So there's times when people are a little awkward, a little uptight, and that creates this friction. It creates this conflict that can exist anywhere, not the least of which is the workplace. Right. And the reason that I wanted to do this is I think it was the last time we were together, Dina, where you made the comment about being introverted and I am too, just for full transparency. And I said, maybe this is something that we need to share with others, because at least in my experience, I have found that a lot of pharmacists at least tend to be introverted. So I'll pause there just for a moment.
Yes. Well, I was actually in preparation for our podcast today. I was like, I'm just going to go Google. Like, I wonder, does AI have anything for me as
Mhm.
far as statistics on this? Because that's curious. And so I typed it in, and it wasn't able to come up with a specific percentage or number of pharmacists that are introverts or anything like that. But what it did say was that there is a quote unquote significant portion of
Mhm.
pharmacists that identify as introverts. And so I was like, yep, that checks out. I know a whole lot of introverted pharmacists and one or two extroverted pharmacists in my own little bubble. So
Yeah.
I think that probably holds pretty true. But
Yeah.
how have you seen this introvert tendency play out in our pharmacies and in our workspaces?
Well, I'll tell you this, Dina. When I started pharmacy school in the latter part of the 90s, our dean or assistant dean had the whole class go through a Myers-Briggs personality inventory. And I'm glad that he did. I don't know that I realized it or understood it at the time, the significance of what he was doing. But my pharmacy class, I'm wanting to say we started off with about 100 students in the class, and we sat in this big lecture hall, and we did this test. And when it was all said and done, we got the scoring back, and it was, and I don't remember this exactly, but I'm going to say it was at least 90%, but it may have been 95% of my class scored exactly the same way. Now, there's a million personality tests out there, and I find value in all of them. It's like all of them, I go through them like, wow, these folks are reading my mail. But this one was very eye-opening, but specifically because so many of us scored the same way, and that was we scored as an ISTJ. And the I, of course, stands for introvert. And so when you have, roughly 100 people in the room, and if 90+% of them are introverts, what does that suggest? It suggests something about at least what pharmacy school was attracting at that time. It may say that this is what the profession attracts as a whole. I don't know that that necessarily holds the same today. I'd be curious, but I don't know if they could even get away with doing personality inventories for incoming students now. I don't know
Right.
what the rules for that are. But that's something that stuck out to me as I've traveled. Right. I remember in the early days of me being involved with clinical services back within Eckerd Pharmacy. I remember traveling to the district office, which was in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And I went in there, and there was a pharmacist who was on duty. His tech, as I got there, I could see that he had one technician, and his technician was going to lunch. And I stood there at the drop-off window, and I looked at my watch. I think he went 7 minutes before he acknowledged me. He would actually take steps, like he would move unnaturally through the pharmacy so he didn't make eye contact
Oh.
with me. And then he finally came over and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you here," and and that was a little bit awkward. And so then me being the poor leader that I was at the time, I said, "Hi, I'm Jess. I'm here from the corporate office to talk to you about clinical services." Just because I mean I was a jerk then, and yeah, that was the smartest thing I knew how to do, and I am not proud of that today by any means. But that was just one example of here is awkwardness that I made more awkward. Right. That here is a lack of approachability that I made it more difficult. Not too long ago, my son was actually having an issue getting a prescription filled, and I remember being in the pharmacy trying to work through what some of the messaging was, and like the pharmacist wouldn't come talk to me, was sending a technician to come talk to me. There was this lack of approachability. I remember I was working in Erie, Pennsylvania, and we had 6 or 7 stores in that market, and I had worked at a few of them, and the one that I worked at was pretty slow. And I remember calling over to see if they had a product in stock, and a pharmacist on duty acted as if he had never been busier in his life. And I knew better. Like,
Mhm.
I'm like, dude, I know you're not working that hard over
Right.
there. And he said, "Oh yeah, I've got to act like I'm always." And the phrase that he used, I'd never heard this expression before, but he said, I have to act like I'm up to my armpits in alligators." And because he wanted to at least give the facade to people that he was super busy, right? And what does that do? I don't know that that attracts people. I don't know that that makes you approachable. And so I think if we can take just a moment, and I share all those stories just to illustrate, some examples that I've been involved with directly, some that I've made worse. But and I'm sure there's all sorts of ones that I've been awkward about myself over the years. But if we're going to lead people well, we need to be approachable. And this approachability principle, I think, can actually give us a bit of a formula that we may be able to use to make our teams more accessible. That your teams will find you more approachable. The people that you serve, the customers, the patients, whatever it is. Just your coworkers outside of the department that you're in. I think this is just a principle that has a lot of value and a lot of practicality for us. So, that's what I thought. Maybe this would be a good one for us to talk about today.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was sitting here thinking about moments in my own history where I can think about being unapproachable, and mine tended to be um for being an introvert, when I get nervous and I know that there's some awkward silence and all that, I feel this obligation to fill it.
Hmm.
And that has often not served me as well as I would have liked. So there's some awkward, how are you doing today? Conversations that people clearly aren't feeling up to. Maybe the patient's sick and not feeling well. And who know, they've been in the hospital for the last 3 weeks, and I ask them, when's the last time they came to the hospital for fun, like
Mhm.
something
Yeah.
completely, off base and tone deaf and not reading the room. And I find I struggle with just sitting in the silence and just letting that be and just making sure the energy and the body language are all
Mhm.
approachable and not feel so obligated to fill it with noise. So, and then, other people obviously are like, oh, I don't say anything ever unless somebody speaks to me first. And, I've had
Right.
like kind of both approaches, but what are some tactics that we can implement?
So I have a small handful of things just to share with you today, to share with our listeners and our viewers that may be helpful, right? Maybe you can find application for yourself. Maybe you can actually find some illustrations just in your own experience. But the first one that I would give you is to have a consistent mood, right? Don't get too high, don't get too low. Be steady, right? There's some people that when things start to get busy, like they become super animated, and like you can tell, right? You can tell when some people get frazzled, and th this is a lesson that I remember teaching my daughter. I remember this is the harsh reality of being a leadership trainer. Is you have the opportunity to be training people all the time, especially in your household. And I remember my daughter being so upset, and I said, well, you always have the opportunity to choose the attitude that you have. You can choose the mood that you had, I told her. And I don't think that she liked that counsel. In all honesty, and I remember she came home from school, or I came home from work, whatever the scenario was, and I wasn't really in a good mood. And I remember that little girl coming over to me and putting her arm over my shoulder and just saying, "Dad, remember what you told me. You can choose your mood." And like, oh man, that can be a sticker right there, man. It was a little bit rough, but there's a lot of truth to that, right? I was having a conversation with a colleague earlier today, with when I was coming up training through the ranks, I worked in an environment where I had staff people on the pharmacy team that weren't steady of mood, right? One was like a cartoon character where if this person got upset, it was just like you could see the red line start at the neck and go to the top of the head, and the smoke come out of the ears, right? And then there'd be the grumbling, and there'd be the cursing, and there'd be the slamming things and throwing things and stuff like that. And like, what does that do for your leadership? What does that how does that make you approachable? Everybody's like, well, stay away from this one, right? Take a couple of steps back.
Mm-hmm.
And, to some extent, I would suggest some of us, and I say that because I was in that environment where we're in a place where we were sort of conditioned, but this was an appropriate way to react whenever things are difficult or when things don't go our way, right? So, one of the things that I would throw out there is just to be able to say, look at having a consistent mood, to the best of your ability, right? You may have a poor experience with a coworker or with a patient, whatever that scenario is, uh, but I want you to know that the next person does not have any reason, does not deserve, in any way, shape, or form, to have some negative experience carry over to them in the care that you're looking to provide them. Right. I could have a poor experience with whatever, but whenever I come to the next person, they don't need it. Right. They need me at my best presenting, to them. And that's something that I wish somebody had explicitly told me 25 years ago, 30 years ago. At this point, that this is something that, I think would be very, very helpful. Do you have any examples like that? Did you ever work with anybody that you could see the line start at their neck and go up to the top of their head?
I mean, I'm embarrassed to admit that I feel like a big piece of that was me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I there was a time I was fresh out of my residency. I was maybe had been a pharmacist for a year or two, and I just let things get to me in a way that just was unhealthy, and to the point where it was causing disruptions and the people around me, and nobody wanted to be around me. And in my mind, like that's what's the crazy piece is like in your mind, your behavior's justified because
Hmm.
of, the just the magnitude of the grievance, that you
Hmm.
feel has been perpetrated against you. And so it's like people who aren't reacting with this type of vitriol all the time and at this level of intensity, they're the ones that, don't know what's going on or don't care
Hmm.
enough or aren't as passionate. And I will never forget getting called into my boss's office at the time and him basically giving me the you can't keep doing this, type
Hmm.
of talk. And this was very strange to me because I was always a fairly level-headed person. I was always this and I never had and I was the goody two shoes. I was the I'll finish my test first and turn it in and I will make sure this and that I was just very like put together, from what and
Hmm.
that was the image I wanted to convey. And so having to get called into my boss's office for a girl who never got in trouble. I never
Hmm.
remember getting in trouble the whole time I was growing up. I was such a goody two shoes. And getting called in and him saying, you can't keep doing this. Like, you're driving everybody crazy. Like, everybody's going bonkers. You can't keep getting this upset about stuff. Like, take some vacation, go home, do this. And I just remember sitting there thinking, that was the most embarrassing conversation I've ever had to sit through. Like, that's crazy. But you know what? I did. And maybe he could have been approached it differently or had some better
Hmm.
leadership techniques or whatever. But looking back on it, I appreciate him so much for just sitting down and me going, yeah, he's right. And I learned to reframe things, in a way that could take it all in and be approachable and have a consistent mood.
Hmm.
And not and things would just roll off more and everything wasn't a crisis and I hadn't been disrespected and, all of this stuff like every single time. And, I don't have to prove myself, basically, is
Hmm.
kind of what I ended up coming away with. But that was a very, very pivotal moment for me with doing that. And, I was able to walk away from that and looking back on it now, I'm like, that's one of the most embarrassing, of course,
Hmm.
but one of the best conversations that a leader has ever done for me. And
Right.
so I was very thankful for it in the long run. But
Yeah.
yeah, I can relate.
Yeah. Life is difficult. Life often gives us tests before we've had the chance to learn the lesson.
Yeah,
Right? You
true.
go through these things, and then all of a sudden, it's like, how did I screw that up? Right?
Yeah.
I would share with our viewers and listeners, look to be consistent, look to be steady, in that regard. And I'm sure I have a boatload of other stories that I can share, as we go down the road, in future episodes. But the first thing I would give you is that consistent mood. The second thing that I would give you is all around calibration. And this is, I've actually had this presented to me a couple of different ways. But before you go into a conversation or before you see somebody and you're like, oh, this is who I need to go talk to, take just a split second and remind yourself that you either and depending on your personality, choose whatever you like, whichever of these you like, but you just say to yourself, I really like this person, right? Or I really love this person. And I'm going to tell you that it absolutely changes your posture walking into that conversation. That it changes the vibe, so to speak, right? We'll talk about this at some other point, down the road, I'm sure. But you've encountered people that have the wrong vibe, right? That you'd rather be away from. Sort of the stereotypical used car salesman. There's some people that just sort of make you feel dirty or icky or whatever the right word is. I'm going to tell you that you can change that by just saying to yourself, I like this person. I love this person. You have some phrase that you do before you go in and you actually start having that conversation. And it is amazing. It is amazing how that can change. It's also scary when you consider it, like how many times you actually do that. For me, it still is nowhere near often enough. But it's sort of a nice little hack that you can do where you just take a moment, take a breath, you say this to yourself, and it allows you to go into that conversation from a perspective and a posture to be much more approachable and to be much more productive with the conversation that you have. So
Okay.
that's number two, and
Okay.
it's all around calibration. So we have consistent mood, we have calibration. Number three is uh, appreciate the differences in people. And when you are leading people, be that people on your team, be that coworkers, be that people that the patients that you serve, whatever the environment is, you need to have this understanding that we are all different. Now, and I don't know that I know any identical twins as I think about it here, but even amongst identical twins, my understanding is that they have different interests, right? They have different. They may look the same, but they may have different pieces or different interests between them. And when you're in an environment, especially a work environment, it can become so easy for people to begin to evaluate and judge others based on their strengths. So each one of us has a certain number of things that we're naturally good at. And because we're naturally good at them, they come easy to us. And because they come easy to us, we have a hard time. This is a very general statement, but I think you can probably find some evidence in your own experience to support this. Things that come easy to you, when you see somebody else struggle with that, there's part of you that just wonders, like, how or why on earth can Dina struggle with this? How can Jess struggle with this? It's like anybody can do it. It's so easy, right? But the fact of the matter is that we need those differences in people. We need those differences in the workplace, right? Because there's all sorts of different skills, and sometimes they're very nuanced skills in your workplace that you need, and you need to have them to be as productive and impactful as you could possibly be. I remember having a cashier who I affectionately referred to as the bodyguard. She guarded me from the challenging people late at night, and that was just the relationship that we had. But she had a skill set that I didn't. And it took me a while to understand it. And she'd come over and she'd be like, "Oh, hey, this is what happened." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, thank you so much for what you did." Um, but I will also tell you, I've been on the other side of that, where I've witnessed, conflict between support staff, technicians, because one does something in a particular way and they do it very well, and they see somebody else that doesn't do it to that same level, and that creates this conflict, and that starts to put up barriers. And we start putting up barriers, you know what we lose? We lose approachability. And so one of the things that I have done with my team, and I've done this some different ways. I had mentioned the Myers-Briggs personality inventory that I did in pharmacy school. Something that I did with my team is we just did something called Strengths Finders, and I had everybody on my team go through. I didn't do this with any blessing. HR did not come say, "Oh yeah, please do this." Anything. I said no. I said I want to do this, and I want to understand what your strengths are. And then, I had 8 people on my team at the time, and if memory serves, there were 33 different domains or different strengths that they had in this assessment, and in the top 5 were presented. So amongst the 8 people, I was going to get 40 strengths. We did not have all 33 strengths presented, but I'm wanting to say we had 29 of the 33 strengths presented
Well,
across the whole team, and like nobody matched on more than one. And like somebody may have had this particular strength in their top spot, but for somebody else it was their fifth. And whenever we took that and we presented it to the group, now what we started to see is we started to see the value that different people brought to the table. We were able to see, oh, here's somebody who is better suited for ABC or XYZ. And I think what that really did, that was something that I firmly believe really helped my team to begin to gel in a much better way because they were able to see people in a slightly different way. They didn't see them as a lesser version of themselves. They saw them as the perfect version of who they were. Right. So I don't know. Have you ever done something like Strength Finders, Dina?
I have not. I'm wishing I had. Maybe I'll
Okay.
find a way to do that with my team
Well, yeah,
here in the
I
next month or two. But yeah.
I'll give you a couple of so strength finders, and there's a million of these. Well, that's probably an exaggeration. There's many of these out there. Strength finders is just one that I was introduced to, and I thought, oh, that's cool. I did that with my clinical team. Whenever I got to drug information, I did it with the drug information team because a lot of these folks were on the phone. They were having different conversations, and they were close enough that they could hear conversations.
Mhm.
And, it can become very easy for person A to say, like, I don't know why it's so difficult for person B. All right. Well,
Right.
it becomes very obvious when you look at the natural tools and giftings and talents that people have. It also gives you a place that you can say this is where we need to work from. But I remember we put all that stuff up on the wall, and it was really a neat thing for people to be able to see and be like, oh, because some of those strengths I'm a little jealous of. Like
Hmm.
I wish I was really good at that.
Uh-huh.
I'm not, but I wish I was good at that. But when you can start to appreciate those differences and just understand this, that it's also then for the patients that you serve. It applies not just to you and your immediate team. It applies to the leadership team within your organization, the people who maybe are upstream from where you operate. They have different strengths than what you do, and you need to recognize that and appreciate that. But you also need them to recognize and appreciate the particular strengths that you bring to the table. So yeah, so that's one of them that I did. But I'm sure if you look, you can find some other ones. There's the Enneagram out there. There's Myers-Briggs. There's a number of different things, but it just helps us see people for the uniqueness that they bring to the table, and I think that also informs how we approach people as well. That improves the approachability factor for us. The last thing that I will give our listeners today is it's around values. Something that I did with my team is, and I don't know if I've told this story on this particular podcast. I've told it many times over the years, but I was at a conference and the keynote speaker comes out and there are about 500 people in the room, and he asks, "How many of you work for a company that has core values?" And in that room of 500 people, 500 hands went high in the air. And he would ask the next question, which was, "How many of you know what those values are?" And 500 hands in the room came down. And that was sort of an eye-opening moment for me. And uh, whenever I left that conference, I had to go look up my company's core values. And I could tell you a longer story, but the end result is that I started every meeting by just reviewing our company's core values. This is what our core values are, right? Because what that did is that kept us pointed in the right direction. This is what we value. We value accountability. We value integrity. We value whatever, and with whatever organization you're involved in, you have your own values, right? And when you can sort of keep that to have your focus, it can be so helpful. It can be so helpful because now we can approach on common ground. Hey, Dina, I need to talk to you because we have this core value of, winning through teamwork. And I don't know that, I think there's a way that we can work together better as a team, right? But this is something else that I learned is that you can have your corporate or company-wide core values. But even within your little team, you can have your own values, right? You have your own little culture within that. And something that I did with my team is we instituted another core value, and the core value was this, and it was be yourself unless you're a jerk. That's what it was, right? So what we did is it was to encourage the uniqueness that everybody brings to the table. It was to recognize that and to value that. But if you're going to come to the table and you're going to be a jerk, we no that part of it, like you can come there's a line, and if there's part of you that's going to be the jerk, leave that behind. So be yourself, unless you're a jerk. And I instituted that way back in 2014. And I would hazard a guess that if you were to pull that team back together, if you were to say, "Hey, do you remember any of the core values?" They may not remember all of them, but I would bet if there's anyone that they remember, it's be yourself, unless you're a jerk, because it was permission for them to play full out as the best version of themselves. And that's what we needed, right? And I think whenever you have an environment where people don't feel like they have to play a role that's contrary or betrays who they are. I think that's something that is very beneficial. And again, that's something that when we recognize that, it makes us more approachable. And so if you take those different pieces, the consistent mood, the calibration statement, the recognizing the differences, and you give people that permission to be themselves, but just don't be detrimental to the work that we're doing. I think those are all things that can go a long way to making everybody more approachable and really being a benefit to the work that you're doing overall.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I was just sitting here feeling a little called out for some
Oh, I got to do better
like
on this.
in a very good way, in a very like, that's a doable piece of advice right there. And
Hmm.
so sometimes in my own experience, these wonderful like huge leadership ideas and concepts sound really good and they resonate and you want to do it. And then when it gets to the level of execution, you're like, what? I'm okay. So how? But with these 4 steps, I mean, first of all, I was like, oh, I remember I wasn't very good at that. I'm still not any good at that. Oh, I did do that. I never did
Hmm.
that. And so they were just very easy to understand, easy to implement. They're like surface level, which is where I'm hanging out right
Hmm.
now. I'm hoping to do a deeper dive the more I
Yeah.
learn, but right now these seem very approachable
Well,
concepts.
yeah, something that I tell people is that little things can make a big difference. And you may not realize it, but like again, whenever I propose to the team, I think we need to add another core value, and I'm sure that they were a little bit alarmed, like, oh my goodness, what are we going to value? And I said, I think we need to have this core value of be yourself unless you're a jerk. The grins started. Now we were all on the phone, so these are the days before video calls like we're doing here. But I would hazard a guess that if you would have had a video camera on people, you would have seen a grin come on their face,
Hmm.
because it was that was something that started to pull that was something else that continued to pull the team together. And
Right.
it made us all more approachable to each other in that regard. And it's a reasonably simple thing. And going into something that you and I talked about an episode or two ago, these are all things you can give yourself permission to do right now.
Hmm.
You can give yourself permission to say, before I go in and have a conversation with the patient, coworker, whatever, just tell yourself, I like this person, and I'm going to tell you, you will stand a little taller walking into that room. Your
Yeah.
face is going to tell a different story when you walk into the room, because you're not going to walk in with a scowl on your face. You're going to
Right.
walk in with something different. And so they are simple things. Um, and I think that's helpful. But I'll also give this warning, because they're simple to do, they're also simple to not do. And so you need to
True.
be reminded to do some of these things. So I would encourage our listeners, pick one, right? That's find one that you say, oh, let me try that. Try it for a day. Try it for a week. See if you notice anything different by doing that. And I fully believe that you will, especially if these are things that you're not doing. But if you find out that it's not serving you well, go on, figure out something else, right? You can take some of these as a bit of a formula. It may
Love it.
be that you want to greet people in a different way, right? So you come up with
Right.
some different thing that you say to yourself, but you find what's true to your environment, and I trust you'll find some benefit there.
Yeah. Well, as my voice teacher would say, you're just adding more colors to your palette with
There you
all of
go.
these little like tools and
Yeah.
everything. Well, Jess, thank you so much. That was fantastic stuff today. I very much enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing your insights with our listeners. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. Just a reminder that we will be launching the 4 Pillars of Leadership Growth Masterclass. We'll be doing that very soon. So be on the lookout for that. It's still at that special introductory rate of free, so be sure not to miss it. You can head over to RPH Ally to sign up for the waiting list over there. There's also lots of resources and a supportive community of pharmacists there as well, so be sure to take advantage of those. You can find Jesse, Sean, and myself over on LinkedIn. We'd love to connect with you there, so hit us up and say hello. And in the meantime, keep leading your teams with confidence from the boardroom to the break room, and we'll see you next time on the Leadership Lab.